All right, but it is 2:02, so I'll keep an eye on participants from here on out. But we are going to get started. So thank you everybody for joining today for our webinar on fake candidates, real problems, how to verify who you're hiring. So we're going to talk about resume fraud, hiring fraud today. I know it's becoming a bigger and bigger topic with the advent of AI and some things that candidates are doing. So we heard a lot of talk about it today. So we are going to hop in and give you our take, hopefully share some valuable information for you today. Our presenters today, we're going to start with our presenters. Person who's been talking to you this whole time and kind of doing some cheesy cliche stuff to get started is myself. My name's Alex. I am the marketing communications coordinator here at CI. Been here for about 4.5 years, and I specialize in turning hiring complexity into practical guidance. We have a star-studded panel today, and I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves. So starting from left to right, Michelle, do you mind telling everybody a little bit about yourself, maybe a fun fact, something interesting for everybody to understand here today?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Well, a lot of you know me, and I appreciate you spending some time with us. I started CI Checked, formerly known as Commercial Investigations, back in 2004. I'm the president. I actually ran my first background check in 1991, but that's not my fun fact. My fun fact is I'm a percussionist, and I'll pass that on to Kelly.
Wonderful. I am Kelly Schnupp. I am the Strategic Alliance Manager here at CI Checked. I have almost 20 years in background screening. I've also worked in HCM sales and partner development.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And our special guest this evening, afternoon, whatever you want to call it, Lindsay, would you mind telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you. I'm Lindsay Mastro, CEO and founder of Conscious HR. Been in the HR world longer than I like to admit. I realize how old I am at that point. We do all things for better people, better business, and better communities. So we are very passionate about helping out our fellow neighbors. And fun fact is I am an aspiring stand-up comedian, and the level of that could be different at every day. So bear with me for any bad jokes I might launch today.
Well, we won't put you on the spot by any means, but if you see an opportunity, please take it. We'd love that. Thank you very much for joining us today again, Lindsay. We appreciate it. So a little bit about us. If you're not familiar with CI Tech, as you heard Michelle say earlier, we used to be known as Commercial Investigations LLC. We've rebranded to CI Tech about 2 years ago now. We were founded in 2004, and we are a women-owned licensed private investigative agency that specializes in pre-employment background investigations. So if you're doing background checks, especially in New York, we'd love to talk to you and be your educational partner in this area, and that's why we're kind of doing this webinar here today. You can see on the screen, we complete 88% of our searches in one day, and we pick up the phone 98% of the time. So when we're done here today, please, everybody in the call us all at once, and 98% of you will get picked up. I promise it'll work. So we also were lucky enough to be featured on the HRO Today's Baker's Dozen list in 2024 and 2025. So if any of our clients are on the call today that helped us get on that, thank you very much for taking the time to fill out the survey. We know that's not a short one by any means, but it really does mean a lot. So thank you for doing that. And Lindsay, would you mind telling everybody a little bit more about Conscious HR before we dive in?
Sure. So we are based out of Syracuse, New York, but we serve nationally. Our focus is on small and mid-market business, and we do everything from an organizational and people first lens. So although compliance is absolutely important in everything HR and people management, we tend to lead with getting the right people in the door and keeping them there, and all of the compliance things really come as the back end of that. So focusing on the people things first tends to make for a better workplace.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And that synergizes very well with what we do, and that's why we love having you on here today. Hopefully the start of a very good partnership between us too.
Awesome.
So for everybody today, just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over kind of the landscape of how resume fraud, how hiring fraud has kind of evolved, especially in the last couple of years. We'll talk some real world examples, not necessarily here at CI, but just kind of a general overview of what we've seen. Some research papers, some other organizations doing kind of tests and this type of thing. We'll talk about the difference between searching and verifying and understanding how to actually confirm the information that your applicant puts in front of you. And then we'll give you a bit of a framework to kind of evaluate your own process by. We should leave around 10 minutes for questions. We do have a packed hour, so it might be cut a little bit short. If you have a question at any time, please feel free to throw it in the chat. I will do my best to work it in naturally. If that doesn't work, then we will get to it at the end. Another housekeeping item, everybody here will get access to the slides, the recording, and if you attended today, you will get an hour of your SHRM CE credit as well, and that'll be sent to you a little bit later today. So before we officially dive in, I just have to give a little quick disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. Kelly, Michelle, Lindsay are not lawyers. CI Tech, Conscious HR are not law firms. Please do not take any of this as legal advice. We are here to give an educational overview and let you know what you should be aware of. But if you really want to dive into any of the different concepts we talk about today, we recommend you talk with your legal counsel because they are the experts in that particular scenario. So again, just not legal advice, but we're happy to share our insights from what we know. Now, I'm a marketer. Before we get in, I have to do a poll. So the first poll today, and I'm going to launch it up, is I'm going to ask, how confident are you that your current screening process would catch a candidate with fabricated credentials? Very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, or have you never really tested it? And these are not gotcha questions. I am not going to give your boss the answer and say, look what he or she said. This is just for our internal records and our internal testing to see what people think and why, kind of why we're putting on this webinar today. So, well, we got quick answers here. I'll leave it up for 5 or 10 more seconds, and I appreciate everybody being participating in this here. And we will end the poll now. So we got kind of a confident group here. So somewhat confident and very good. We have one very confident, which is a good thing. Not confident, we've never really tested. That's okay too. That's what we're here to talk about today. So I hope everybody finds this time valuable, whether you're super confident or not really so much anyway. So let me stop sharing here, and we will officially dive in to our first section of understanding today's hiring verification challenges. So Michelle, I'm going to bring you in first, and let's start with kind of a reality check for everybody. Resume embellishment is not a new concept. We've been dealing with it for a very long time. We've all heard stories, but the data on how widespread it is might surprise some of our viewers here today. Can you kind of set the stage for us and let us know what the landscape looks like right now?
Sure. It's always interesting. We do so many background checks. We see a lot of fabrication, but it isn't that common, but it's common enough. And with the evolution of technology that we're going to talk about, it's becoming more and more common. So I want to be clear up front. We're not here to scare anyone. Most candidates are honest, but the data tells us that verification gaps are real. Understanding the landscape helps you build a smarter process. So let me show you what the research actually says. So the Society of Human Resource Management, and by the way, if anybody's going to the annual conference in a couple of weeks, I'll be there. Let me know. We'll connect. So the SHRM found that 78% of resumes contain some form of misleading information. Career Builder research shows that 75% of HR managers have caught lies on resumes at some point. Feel free to chat us any stories you have. Now, let's be clear about what this means. Misleading covers a wide range. Some of it is honest mistakes. Someone misremembers their start date by a month. Some of it is intentional embellishment, inflating a job title or stretching responsibilities. And some of it is outright fabrication. One that I've most recently been involved in actually involved an individual. And let me just ask you, this is, you can definitely type this into the chat if you'd like, but do you remember the year you graduated from high school? I think that's one of the biggest milestones in everybody's life. And when you get a background check and somebody doesn't have the date they graduated from high school, right, it's a red flag. And we've just been talking about that in the organization from a couple of examples we've had. But the most common areas we see job titles that don't match what the employer confirms. Okay. Employment dates that are extended to cover gaps. I mean, I think that that's the oldest trick in the hat. Education claims that don't check out. Skills listed that the candidate can't actually demonstrate, and that's getting harder and harder, but the right interview questions are helpful there. This isn't about assuming every candidate is lying. It's about understanding why verifications exist in the first place, because inaccuracies exist, and your process should account for that. So, the other thing is we can talk about your processes and LinkedIn profiles. So then, now that I've started on the LinkedIn profiles, do you accept a LinkedIn profile in place of a resume? They are even more fabricated, and it's even more interesting when you dig into somebody's LinkedIn profile. And if it's a LinkedIn profile, is it fabrication if it's not accurate versus a resume presented to HR? Like Alex said, we're not lawyers here. So, but I would say a resume presented for a job is better be pretty squeaky proof. The LinkedIn profile is a little questionable, but we do encounter HR people that will accept a LinkedIn profile in place of a resume. Just watch that. It's very interesting. We do some extensive key person background checks where we'll actually take a resume, a LinkedIn profile, any other social media profile out there, and we'll validate everything on there. And it is interesting about the amount of fabrication. So, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's all right. Please stay on there. Stay on there. We're going to keep you here. You talked about the baseline and what we've been dealing with, and LinkedIn is not necessarily new, but people have kind of taken it to new heights lately. In the addition of everything else, something shifted recently. It wasn't always as widespread as it was, at least in my understanding, right? And you've been doing this longer than I have. So, Michelle, can you tell us, what has changed in your eyes or in CI Tech's eyes, for example?
Sure, sure. And of course, I alluded to this a few minutes ago. It's technology, technology is amazing. It's very helpful. It's great, but it can be used in other ways as well. So, candidates have new tools and employers have new tools. So let me walk you through what that looks like. But first, I want to get back to the education thing because this was an involved background check. We actually got a university transcript and a diploma example that were falsified as well from the same person who couldn't remember the year that they graduated from high school. And it's amazing what they produce and with the technology available to create a false transcript and a false diploma. Of course, we went through the means to validate that they were false as well, but there's an example of technology. So let's talk about Gartner. Gartner, the research firm Gartner, they project that by 2028, 1 in 4 job candidates globally could be using some form of fabricated credentials. That's not a scare tactic. That's an analyst projection based on current trends. Okay, so here's what's driving it. AI tools can now generate polished resumes, compelling cover letters, and even help candidates prepare interview responses. For most people, that's just smart job searching. But the same technology enables bad actors to create entirely fabricated professional histories. So, story warning. So we do these key person backgrounds for business transactions, and we were involved in helping with the background on an individual whose business was being looked at a larger entity for potential acquisition. And it was really interesting because this person, everything was checking out, but at the same time, the same person was using a different name in a different industry with a whole thing that was checking out as well. So it wasn't like there was false information there, but this person was going by 2 different names in 2 different industries. And it took a lot to put that together and really prove it was the same person. But it's very interesting what people will go through. I have no idea why that person wanted the 2 different identities or anything, but it was disclosed to the entity that was looking to acquire his company. So just a very high-end investigation that we were involved in. So we've seen deep fake technology entering the hiring process. So recently, there's been cases of candidates using face swapping software during video interviews. So the FBI and the Department of Justice issued public warnings about remote hiring fraud schemes. In December of 2024, the DOJ indicted 14 individuals tied to a scheme that funneled over 88 million through fraudulent remote work using stolen American identities to get hired at US companies. So I want to be clear, we're not saying every remote candidate is suspicious. We're saying the landscape has evolved and verification processes need to evolve with it. For example, something we've launched in the last few years is ID Checked. It's a biometric identity validation. So during the hiring process and during the background check, we biometrically validate a person's identification. So it doesn't get better than that these days. But that's an example of how we've had to evolve and how the technology has helped us evolve.
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. Yeah. That ID check has become very popular with a number of our clients and prospects. And it's not like this, crazy computer system. It's just taking a selfie and making sure it matches up with everything. But with our technology and with the resources we have, we can verify that information before moving forward. So definitely something if you're interested in that side of things, please let us know. All right. Now I have my second poll of the day, and there's going to be a couple of these. So you got to deal with me on this. All right. So I'm going to launch this one. We're going to ask, has your organization encountered a candidate where something didn't add up during the hiring process? And we're going to say yes, and we caught it. Yes, and we discovered it after hiring. Not that we're aware of, or we don't have any way to know. So, and again, if you can be honest on this one, I understand. I'm not here to do gotcha questions or anything like that. So please let us know, and we'll use it for our content, for our emails, that type of thing there. And we'll leave it open for maybe 10 more seconds here. Getting a lot of quick answers today. I like that, people. This is a good group. I appreciate that. Makes my job easier. All right, we'll end it here. We have a resounding yes, and most of the people caught it before you're hiring. Looks like one person discovered it after hiring. So everybody's going through the same thing, right? And while it might not be some of the things we've talked about so far, maybe it was a little bit more rudimentary. This is only kind of accelerating, and that's why we're here to talk to you today. So, panelists, any thoughts on this particular poll? Any answers or anything that was unusual that maybe you weren't expecting there, or is that kind of par for the course with, Michelle, with what you've seen in your time here at CI Checked and also in the background screening industry?
I would be surprised if it was the other way around.
Okay, good. Good. All right, well, we got an honest group then. That's excellent. So I'll stop staring here. And now let's move into kind of the data well, Michelle talked about the data and the trends, but let's look about what the verification challenges actually look like in practice, and we'll talk about some real world examples. Excuse me. So Kelly, I'm going to bring you in on this one because you're kind of on the front lines with clients, prospects every day. You're talking to a number of different people every single day. What do verification challenges really look like, and when it shows up during the hiring process? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. So what I'd like to do is walk you through some real life examples, not to alarm everyone, but to show you what verification catches and why it matters. So these aren't hypotheticals. These are the kind of situations that show up in background checks. So let me tell you about PinDrop. They're a cybersecurity firm. They posted a job listing, nothing special, and decided to analyze their applicant pool. Out of 827 applications, approximately 100, that is 12.5%, showed signs of fabricated identities. This wasn't a targeted attack on their company. This was just a routine job posting. They just happened to look closely. So the takeaway isn't 12% of your applicants are going to be fraudulent. The takeaway is that fraud attempts are more common than most employers actually realize. And most employers aren't looking as closely as PinDrop did. So here's another one for you. A security company called VDoc. was conducting video interviews and noticed that something was off. The video and the audio weren't quite syncing right, and they tried something simple. They asked the candidate to simply wave their hand in their face, and the face swapping software couldn't handle it. It actually glitched. What I love about this example in particular is that it was a low tech, this solution was low tech. They didn't need AI direction, any kind of AI software. They needed a human being actually paying attention and asking the candidate to do something unexpected. So basic observation caught what technology missed.
Yeah, and just to add in, I've seen a couple of these videos out there where sometimes the candidate will just refuse to do what was asked, like wave their hand or something like that, and then and over and over and over and over again. And it's a little funny, but at the same time, it's kind of scary. So,
Yeah.
like Kelly said, some of these kind of low tech solutions work almost as well when you're on a video interview like that. So, Kelly, please continue here.
Absolutely. So this one here happens more than you'd actually think. Candidate lists a supervisor as a reference. We call to verify. The actual supervisor says, I've never heard of that person before. And it turns out that the phone number on the resume was a Google Voice number created the week before. So reference checks are probably the most underused verification tool in hiring. People collect names, but they never call them, or they call and they ask generic questions. When you actually are speaking with supervisors, this is an opportunity to ask specific questions about the candidate's work and things that databases can't tell you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And here at CI Tech, at least, and I assume in a lot of providers, but definitely here at CI Tech, we allow you to kind of customize your reference questions or education employment to a certain extent, where if you want to know something particular to your business, you can absolutely do that with us. So, Lindsay, I'm going to bring you in here for the first time here. Thank you very much for joining again. We've seen fabricated identities in applicant pools. We've seen deep fakes during video interviews, and now references that lead to, nowhere, essentially. If this is happening, why aren't more organizations catching it exactly? Right? You spend your days inside organizations auditing their HR operations and training their teams. What are you actually seeing and what are you actually hearing on the ground from your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. What we're seeing is really the results of confusion and some significant time inefficiencies when organizations aren't aware that this is even possible or happening. And they're not necessarily, understanding what can be changed because of these new technologies. And if those obviously they're changing very rapidly and ongoing, it's hard to keep up with all of these new things, certainly. So I think the first thing to look for is awareness and knowing this is even an issue. So it's wonderful that you're here on this webinar today to become more aware of the issue. And then the second thing is really understanding the motivation for having these false identities in the first place. It's obviously, in addition to the financial risk, it's also a big data risk as well. So, the data is worth a lot of money these days too. So I think that's a big concern. So if you know where the motivation is coming from of why you would have these falsified identities, it becomes a little bit easier to spot them if you know where it's coming from. And then I think the third thing is to know how to handle it when it actually happens, when you do get the person who refuses to wave their hand in front of their face. I did it. I'm a real person. It didn't glitch. So yeah, awareness, understanding, and certainly what do we do about it, I think are the three things that cause those gaps and inefficiencies. So this stat that's here on screen, 48% of HR professionals have received no training on identifying hiring fraud. And I think that makes a lot of sense, again, because things are just happening so quickly. So it's not just that people haven't been trained on that fraud specifically, but it is that most organizations don't have a consistent or documented process for how to handle it when it happens. And inherently in the hiring process, recruiters, they could have verified interest in digging into the application consistencies, and then some of them may be bringing people through the pipeline anyways because they're being pressured to really fill that seat. Another recruiter or HR person, whoever's handling that rec, might escalate the issue, but has no way to really stop it from happening next time, depending on how large the organization is. So that inconsistency really becomes a liability issue as well. As you know, if you're handling discrepancy differently for candidate A versus candidate B, there's a likelihood that you could have some type of a protected class issue in the distinction there between those two candidates. So now you've just created a pattern that does become very difficult to defend if it were questioned at some point.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we completely agree with that. We have our CI checked has kind of a template for the after hire and what to do after then, but not many organizations or maybe not all organizations have something to detect what we're talking about here today. So that's a great point. Thank you very much for bringing it up. All right, third poll of the day. Don't get tired of me yet. I'm going to ask, does your organization have a documented process for handling discrepancies found in the background check, in your background check? Yes, clearly documented. Somewhat, it's informal. No, you handle it case by case, or maybe you're just not sure, and that's okay too. And we're totally fine with that. So I will let it run for a little bit here. And it looks like we're getting a good variety of answers to start with. So that's excellent. Always makes it more interesting that way. Maybe I'll ask our panelists if they have any thoughts here. I just lied. All right, we'll leave it up for 5 more seconds. All right, let me stop here and share. So we got a good kind of spread here on this one. So I think the case by case kind of took the cake here, just barely. And some things that Lindsay that you were just mentioning about the candidate A versus candidate B, how you kind of open yourself up to possibly some discrimination issues there. But then we have a little bit of informal, yes, clearly documented, and a little bit of I'm not sure. So panelists, any thoughts or comments on our results here on this particular poll?
I'll dive in there. For the case by case basis, I think that's how we've largely been handling it in the past before technology has really stepped up and forced us to take a look at this. So, human in the loop needs to happen so that we can verify these things. But when it's happening more and more, the propensity for those discriminatory type issues will pop up too. So really documenting that process and having that in place is going to be super important, not because it always has been, but just because of kind of the new things that we're dealing with and seeing with at a higher pace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in that documentation, Lindsay, we have an individual assessment decision matrix. So whether you're case by case or any of the other answers here, it is a spreadsheet tool, and I'd be happy to go over it with anybody if you want to reach out. But it does help you with that documentation. It's an individual assessment decision matrix.
Yeah, please ask us about it if you're interested. I will stop sharing here. And again, thank you for being willing participants in our poll. So, Michelle, I'll bring you back in on this part here. So we've laid the landscape out. We've kind of seen what some of these verification challenges look like. Now let's talk about how we can actually catch them in our process here at CI, or Lindsay, you can always hop into about what you do at Conscious HR to help employers catch this kind of thing. So Michelle, can you break down the difference between running a search and then actually verifying that information that we find or that the applicant gives us?
Sure, Alex. So I'll try to stay off my soapbox a little bit here, but the distinction matters. A search and a verification, you have to have the search to do the verification, but you don't need the verification if you have the search. So it really depends upon what you're really looking for as far as an objective with your background checks and what your background check provider is providing you. So the verification takes the data and really makes sure that it makes sense. It's scrutinized. There's human brain power, human intervention, and investigative audit. Really looking at the data close. It's kind of like think of searching a Google query versus verification as an investigative journalism. So there's quite a difference there. So a few things to keep in mind. So let's walk through what this looks like in practice, open the hood on a standard background check a little bit. So we've got the criminal backgrounds, jurisdictional jungle, Alex calls it. So with this, there's a lot of places you can look for criminal records, and it's a matter of being complete and looking in the right place and then using all the data together, verifying the information together. We'll talk a little bit later about an audit or an assessment of your background check process, but that's where you really want to dig into all the different elements of a criminal background check that's available. Education and employment verification. So you can get some quick database results there, but really, is it valid? I mentioned LinkedIn, so there are not a lot of people with my name in the world. But I was talking to a guy one time and he's like, oh, I bet you there's hardly any of me. And I said, well, let me look. In 5 seconds, I said, there's at least 9 of you. So there's a lot of name twins, we like to call them. If somebody's on LinkedIn and they're looking for people with their same name, if you've done this, put it in the chat. Have you ever Googled or have you ever searched LinkedIn for your name and seen how many profiles pop up? So say you don't have that college degree, with somebody else with your name does. Well, if somebody's validating a diploma by name, that's gonna validate it. If they're using other personal identifying information like a social security number, a date of birth, and other things, that's a verification. You're going a little bit deeper and making sure that it's right. But that's a good example of kind of the difference there, and what you want to make sure you're really getting verification of the information supplied. Unemployment, there's some very automated employment information out there, but it's how you approach it and what's done with it. A basic check doesn't tell you about the quality of their work or, different things about eligibility for rehire. Then there's a lot that can come into play when you do a reference check. And Kelly had mentioned those before as being a bit underutilized. References are really interesting, and you get a lot of employers who are of the camp that, like, people are only going to put down people that they know are going to give them good references. And for the most part, that's not necessarily wrong, but you can determine what you require as far as a reference. You require professional references, so it's somebody you worked with. Is it somebody you reported to, or somebody who reported to you? And you can get multiple. You can get one of each. Things like that, depending upon your provider. And you can really dig in on references and get some good information to really verify details about the person. So that's a verification. You're not going to get a data dump from a reference check. You've got professional credentials. So this is really interesting to me. Somebody in our industry tried to create a professional license verification service, and they called me up and I entertained the call. I'm like, okay, can I test it? So, and I said, you're not thoroughly searching the New York Department of Education data. And they're like, yeah, we are. And they said, no, because you have to go here. After you go here, you have to go here, and you have to get the disciplinary actions. And after telling me they had the disciplinary actions. So every state has its own licensing verifications for the licenses that it issues. So there really is no one-stop shop for license verifications. So you need to have a vendor who's going to the primary source and validating information directly at the primary source there. That's a verification versus sticking something in a data search and getting a database search. So, database searches are not bad products. It's using them in conjunction and using that human intervention and the variables involved there. To create a piece of the screening puzzle and really put it all together. It provides the raw materials, but you don't want to just rely upon that. You want some more of this methodologies and to develop some different levels of confidence in the data that you're using, and not just relying on that raw data. So this really brings me to the heart of the matter. This is where human verification, human intervention makes all the difference in a good hire or a catastrophic mistake. Database searches provide data. Human verification provides context. So that's where you want to be focusing with your vendors and with your processes. There's critical high stakes that can happen when you're simply relying on databases. So think about your risk mitigation and where you really want to go with your background investigations. We've talked about, there's gaps, there's flaws, there's illusions of the data. Brings us to the ultimate question: what does good verification actually look like in practice? If we aren't just searching, what are we actually doing? So let's break down the gold standard across the board. So for education, Again, I gave you that great example. We're not necessarily just hitting a database search, especially if something isn't coming out quite right or we're not getting all the details that we want. We're contacting that registrar's office, getting the details. There's lots of ways people can manipulate the databases available for education these days. Then you've got employment verification and details there. There are some good data sets with employment verifications, but it really has to be looked at depending upon the results that come back to make sure that you're getting deep in the right areas and you're getting the right details with that employment verification. We talked about the professional license and the different ways that things can really go astray with a professional license there. So really knowing the resources and the primary source verification going on there is important. I love those reference checks. They're very personal, and with most good background screening companies, you can choose your questions. There might be different levels and different costs available. You might do it for some positions and not for others, but you can get some really in-depth detail with a reference verification out there. Ultimately, your hiring team and your screening provider need to work hand in hand. You want a complete background report that looks in the candidate's file. Can this stand up in front of your board of directors? Can you explain this person's background by using this report with absolute unwavering confidence? If you look at the report and your honest answer is, well, I guess so, or the computer gave it a green light, then you haven't actually verified anything. There are gaps worth addressing. Don't settle for, I guess so. Demand the truth, invest in context, and hold out for real verifications.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Michelle. That was excellent. And I know we focused on kind of a lot of the verification side of things in this one section here, but that search versus verification kind of overall theory and idea applies to any type of search that you're going to do. Criminal, cyber investigations, motor vehicle, any of that type of stuff. It's always going to be that you want that full, complete picture on your applicant versus just kind of getting what Michelle said of that quick database kind of raw material section there. So that applies to pretty much everything that we do here. So, can you guess what's coming next? Another poll. Yep. So I'm going to ask, when your organization verifies employment history, what typically happens? What's your process? Do you contact employers directly and speak with supervisors? Do you use a database or automated service? Does your background check provider handle it? Or do you rely on what the candidate tells you? And again, thank you again, everybody, for dealing with me. I know these can get a little bit tiring, so thank you for answering still. Make my job easier. Thank you very much. We'll leave it up for another 5 or 10 seconds here, and we're getting a good spread once again here on this one. All right, let me end it here. So it looks like most people are using their background check provider, which is excellent. Good to hear. Hopefully we're your background check provider. If not, give us a call. Otherwise, some of you are contacting employers directly, some are using a database, and then others are relying on what the candidate tells you. So a good spread here of different methods to verify this information. But again, like Michelle said, you're going to want to take some of those things into account and just be sure that you kind of do that evaluation of your process when we're done here, and we'll give you a couple of tips to do that when we move on. So let me stop sharing here. All right, Lindsay, we've covered the landscape, we've seen real world examples, and now we've broken down the difference between searching and verifying. That's a full day right there, like Jimmy V used to say. Now let's turn the mirror inward, right? Before you evaluate your screening provider, you need to evaluate your own house, right? I think that's fair. And that's not just because I'm a screening provider saying that, right? I think that's fair. Lindsay, you do this for a living. You walk into organizations and audit their processes. If you were sitting across the table from everybody in this call today right now, what would you ask them from that HR standpoint?
Well, I like to rely on vibes as much as possible, but things like this really tell us that we can go off the vibes of what the candidate is, saying, feeling, explaining, but having that data approach at the same time is incredibly important. And that's truly how you move towards a human first approach, is there has to be some type of data validation that's going into how well do we connect with this person as an individual, as a human, as a cultural fit, all of those things. So I am going to give you a bit of a framework here and three questions that you can ask yourself in addition to the screening process and the data that you're collecting. And these are not compliance-based questions, but more operational questions about whether your process is doing what you want it to do or what you think it does. So the first question really is around, do you have a written policy for how these background check results are reviewed? And key part, who is reviewing them? So this isn't going to be the screening provider's process, but it's more your own internal process, and how you're reviewing and really comparing your organization's reality against those results. So when those results come back, who is the person that's actually opening the report? Who is deciding what is a red flag and what isn't? And is that person that's doing all of that evaluation, are they trained on what they're looking at, or are they just, the person that has access to that system, that process, that technology? In a lot of organizations, the answer is going to be, whoever is handling that specific requisition or that opening. And that means that the decision making is really only as good as the experience, the knowledge, the understanding of that one person. So really good thing to first consider is who is the person and how educated they are in this process. Question two is when something doesn't match, when the dates are off, like Michelle was talking about, if there is a degree or certification that can't be confirmed, if a reference says something unexpected, what is your escalation path at that point? Is it written down? Does everyone on your hiring team know what that process is or what that documentation is? Or does it depend to, or is it depending on whoever happens to be handling that one candidate? And I think an important thing that I talk about all the time is it's rarely bad intent on these people, on your part, on their part. It really just comes down to not having that standardized process. And again, that's when you start to run into that comparison issue that runs into discriminatory issues as well. The third question is, when was the last time you actually reviewed your hiring documentation for consistency? And if you were going to pull your last 10 hiring files, and important to mention there, can you actually find your last 10 hiring files? Do they exist? Where are they? Do they all contain the same elements? And were those discrepancies that you came across, were they documented in the same way? The most important part of this obviously comes down to that comparison piece and that compliance piece. And if you had all of those files, could you hand them off to an attorney and feel confident that they'd see some pattern of fairness? Most organizations that we're working with, they can't. And again, it's not bad intent, it's just a poor documentation process. That's not really a screening problem, but that's a policy, a process, and a training problem that we address most of the time. So just organizing a bit, and getting everybody on the same page about that process really eliminates a lot of these other issues.
I love that point about it's rarely bad intent. We're not here to blame anybody, obviously, but like you said, just some of that documentation, that organization there. So Kelly, I'll bring you in because I think it's only fair. We asked three questions about the people here. Let's talk about three questions for your screening provider too. Can you take us through some questions that everybody on the call today should be asking their provider about the things we've been talking about today?
Absolutely. So, question one would be, what percentage of your verifications involve human contact versus database only searches? There's no wrong answer here. It really depends on what you're paying for, and you really should know what you're getting. The other question would be, how do you handle discrepancies when a candidate says one thing, but an employer says another? What's your process? Do you flag it and move on? Do you dig deeper? Do you contact the candidate for additional clarification? And then the third question would be, what happens when you can't reach someone? If the listed employer doesn't respond, if the reference number is disconnected, what is the process? Unable to verify might be accurate, but it doesn't give you a whole lot to work with. So the standard here is simple. Your provider should be able to explain to you their methodology clearly. The answer, if it's vague and you're getting a sales pitch, that tells you something too.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Michelle was talking about earlier too. So always good to ask about this information, and we're happy to. If you're a CI Tech client, we're happy to talk to you about our methodology too.
Mm-hmm. So one more thought, not every role requires the same level of verification. An entry-level position with limited access is different from a remote finance role with access to sensitive data. So consider things like this, factors like this. What systems and data will this person access? Are they client-facing? Are they remote? Are they on-site? How much autonomy will they have? Higher risk roles will warrant deeper investment and verifications. So the goal isn't to run the most expensive background check on everyone. Instead, it's to match the verification investment to your actual risk profile. That's the smart resource allocation.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we're happy to do that. We do that with a number of our clients too, where we're not here to just charge you the highest rate available. We're here to get you a full complete picture on your applicant, depending on that role that Kelly just mentioned there. All right, everybody. Last one. Last poll of the day, and then you're done. You can go home. Don't tell your boss I said that. When was the last time your organization reviewed its background screening program with your provider? Was it within the last 6 months, 6 to 12 months ago, more than a year ago, or maybe you've never done a formal review? And if you're with us, please tell us, because we will be happy to do that. So otherwise, please answer honestly. And again, not here to badmouth any other screeners or anything like that, but just here to understand what the kind of frequency is between how often you're doing this kind of formal review, especially with all this new technology, all this new stuff that we've been talking about today. And I'll leave it open for just 5 more seconds. We're getting a good spread here again. All right, let me set it off. So it looks like the majority have been more than a year ago. Some have been in the last year, and then a little bit in the last 6 months, and then some of you have never done a formal review. So that's interesting. Can't say it's not terribly too unexpected, but it's something to talk with your background screening provider about. If you are interested in anything that we talked about here today and that you're maybe concerned about or have questions about, your background screening provider should be more than happy to kind of give you that full formal review with you at some point there. And you can always schedule something with us if you're interested there. So I will stop sharing. So okay. Again, thank you everybody for doing all those polls. We're getting to the end here. So Michelle P., I'm going to bring you back in for kind of the last word. We talked about kind of an evaluation framework that we're going to give some people, and we talked a little bit about it with Lindsay and Kelly giving some questions there, but I want to make sure everybody leaves today with something actionable. So Michelle, can you give us that framework that people can bring back to their organization tomorrow or next week or whenever it works on their roadmap?
Sure. I got 4 things that you could do this week. They just require some action. You don't require budget. They don't require committee meeting, nothing like that. They just require some action. So let's shift from theory to execution here, and let's get into requesting your search methodology and writing. Really find out what is part of your package. And I like to talk about depth and breadth of background checks. So the depth is how far deep you go, how many years you go. The breadth is like how many names do you search? Are you getting primary name only? And are you getting primary name only in some searches and not other searches? And why would that be? Are you getting all names they used in the last 7 years? Are you getting all names they used in the last 10 years? What are your parameters around those details that are part of your package? So not just a list of package, what's included in your package, but some specific details like that. Then we also have, Lindsay had talked about pulling some reports and stuff. So she talked about 10, but let's say you can get your hands on 3 that have discrepancies. look at those. Adverse information. A lot of systems will make it red, give you a red flag. They'll mark it some way, shape, or form that there's adverse information in there. You still should be looking at all the details of your background checks and scrolling through those reports as they're completed. But find some that have discrepancies and figure out, like, how are those handled? What did your internal HR team do with those? A lot of you said it's a case by case basis, which is not bad, not the wrong answer, but was it done similarly on each case by case basis? Is there any opening up for discrimination that we talked about earlier and things like that? So really analyze those situations and decide, is that the way you want to move forward with handling adverse information in your organization? So, consistency isn't just about efficiency, it's about protection and mitigating your risk. So, another thing you can do, I know that this is going to take a little more time than some of the others, but call a reference, get a reference on the phone. So you might have to make a couple of different calls, but see where the conversation leads you. Think about what questions you ask, what questions you are inclined to ask, and see if you can't develop a better questionnaire for your reference checks by going through that process and that exercise. It's also just a really big eye opener of what goes on when your background checks are happening and what happens with reference verifications. And then, of course, we've talked about this. Schedule that program review. We do, with a lot of our clients, we do QBRs, quarterly business reviews. We'll do a real in-depth dive anytime they want it, but we try to get in front of them every 6 or 12 months. Sometimes the timing isn't right, and sometimes it's hard to know when the timing is right. So, it might be something you want to do regularly. Like I tell people, on your birthday, log into freecreditreport.com and download your credit report from each of the 3 credit bureaus. And then it's just something you do. Or your birthday week, if you don't necessarily want to spend your birthday doing that. But, not that your birthday has to kick off a program review, but what type of year, like, you're cyclical, you're seasonal, what time of year is a good time for you to request a review and then give your provider a few weeks to take a look and come back? And when's a good time for you to invest an hour in reviewing your program? So you might want to hook it up that way. So if any questions we raised today gave you pause, or you're not entirely sure of anything, any flags pop up, now or anytime in the future, we'd be happy to help you through them, regardless of who your provider is. Like we said, we answer 98% of our calls, so you're going to get a pretty fast response there. And a lot of times you're looking at adverse information that really needs something done timely. So we offer the complimentary screening assessment regardless of who your provider is too. And this is where we can usually tell by looking at a report what that depth and breadth is. But that's something you should be asking your provider and seeing if they can define it as well. We can get into that based upon each of your searches and what it should be. One of the things we'll see somebody do all names for criminal checks, but not all names in sanctions databases. And if you're a healthcare entity and you're doing a healthcare sanctions search, why would you just do the primary name? Especially if you're doing all names in a criminal verification. So we see a lot of providers providing that type of inconsistency across your background check. And that's kind of a hard situation to defend. Why did you do it one way on one set of searches and another way on another set of searches? And sometimes the HR people haven't even really looked at it from that perspective to realize that. But we can help you with that. We can help you identify that. So can your current provider or anybody else willing to help you take a look, like an HR professional like Lindsay or somebody like that. So take a step. Those were 4 options. You don't have to do all 4, but did one of those resonate with you? Can you make a commitment to do one of those? I'd love to hear back from you in a week or a month. Did you do one of them? How did it work out from you? I'm very interested. Like I've been in the industry 35 years, and it's just fascinating to me and continues to be. So please share some information.
Yes, absolutely. We love hearing it. We love hearing if these webinars are valuable and if they do, if you do take something from it. Again, like Michelle mentioned, we do offer these assessments. So it's not a sales pitch, not anything like that. But if you're interested and want to learn more, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. So we got about 5 minutes left. So I will open it up for some Q&A here. If anybody has a question, feel free to chat me directly or open it up to the just general chat box there. I did have one come in during our presentation here that was directly to me, and I think it's probably best for Michelle P. But Lindsay, you might have a couple of insights to share with us as well. So Michelle, the question was, what should we do if we suspect a current employee wasn't properly verified when they were hired?
So the first thing I would say is check your consent form and make sure it's evergreen. So most are, and not that it's a snapshot in time. So when anybody gets a background check through a system for employment purposes, they sign off on a consent form. Is it only good at that point in time, or is it good for the duration of employment? If it's good for the duration of employment, you can look at how you've handled things in the past, but you can use that consent form to do another background investigation. And we do, in some industries, we do monitoring, which is continuous monitoring. We do recurring background checks. We do background checks when somebody's promoted, and we do background checks when there's suspicious activity or suspicion. I talk to HR people all the time. Oh, somebody called me anonymously and said so and so has something here and here, that kind of stuff. And every HR department has to determine how they're going to deal with that. But when you're alerted to something, the best course is action. And I will turn it over to Lindsay. I'm sure she, from an HR professional, has more to add.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's always the random anonymous tip, right? That there's something going on and we don't want to tell you what it is. The biggest thing that I've had to explain with clients we've worked with and throughout my history in HR is one, it's he said, she said at that point. So the validation and the verification process of figuring out if there's any truth to this claim is the number one thing. The second piece is really more of the question of how important is this information based on the experience of the skill set, the behavior, the delivery of work for this employee? Is it an impact to their actual work, to their skills, to the requirements of the job? If this is what you would perceive as negative information, if it doesn't impact their actual ability to do their job or the output of their job, and it's hearsay, you don't want to go down a 6-month investigative process if ultimately it really isn't impacting their job in the first place. So inherently, there could be some discriminatory issues once you have to go dive into that process. That's one thing that I always say, like, how big of a deal is this really? How much is it impacting the job and the people around them and the organization as a whole? Just kind of like the reality check.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough situation if you ever find yourself in there. Yeah, so it's kind of a nuanced answer there for sure. So
I
go ahead.
I'll add to Michelle had mentioned it a few slides back, but when you're implementing these processes, it's the consistency is important. So she talked about the different levels of risk and making sure that whatever process, whatever programming, whatever system you're putting in place, one, can you carry that out consistently? And are you likely to carry it out consistently? You don't want to put a process or a policy in place if it's not something that you know that you can actually stand up and act consistently with. So always aligning reality with that process is very important. You're eliminating that discrepancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Great add on there. Great add on. I'm going to give everybody like 30 more seconds because you're not going to get this panel together for a while again. So if you have a question, please let us know now. Send us an email after, but this is a great time if you have anything. So I'll give you a little bit longer, but I'm not going to wait forever. We're almost at 3 o'clock here, unfortunately. If I don't see anything else, let me just say we thank you all for coming today. You can visit CI Checked online, call us, send us an email, send us a carrier pigeon, whatever your preferred method of contact is. We will find a way to get back in touch with you. Lindsay, would you mind telling people where people can find you or Conscious HR or any other information about what you do to help employers?
Sure. Well, I don't want Michelle looking me up on LinkedIn and doing my own. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Lindsay Mastro Giovanni, actually, speaking of different last names and abbreviating it for the sake of simplicity. But you can find me as Lindsay Mastro Giovanni on LinkedIn. Our website is conscioushr.co. You can reach out there, find me anywhere. Happy to talk to you about your policy, your process, and just kind of overall what your business goals are. That's where we start. What kind of people do you want to have working in your organization? How do we find the right people and how do we keep them there? I'm very just a curious person, and my team is very curious about the things that go on in the workplace. So welcome any conversation about any concerns you have as far as background checks, as far as bringing the right people to you. Would love to talk to you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, for everybody that joined today, thank you very much for spending an hour with us. Lindsay, Michelle, Kelly, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. We covered a lot of ground today. We had a packed hour, so I think everybody found it valuable. We know the landscape has changed. Technology has made it easier for resume and hiring fraud to kind of be out there in the world. Remember, everybody, we're here for a resource. If you have any questions, please reach out to CI Checked or Conscious HR. Again, thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. We will see you in the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.